And now we're just at 3 p.m. Eastern. So it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Jessica Bailey, to kick things off.
Thank you, Shanna. So I want to start by reviewing our agenda for today. We'll have our quick introductions, and we are then going to hear from 3 presenters on 3 different topics. The first is a data framework for promoting equity from the REL Northeast Islands. REL Mid-Atlantic will present Accuracy for Everyone, which focuses on using Bayesian stabilization to improve the reliability of performance measures. And REL Midwest will present Forecasting for Equity, the data-informed leadership for equity approach. Following these presentations, we'll engage in a panel discussion to explore connections among these topics and their implications for practice. We'll then move into a Q&A session where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. Finally, we'll wrap up with closing remarks and next steps. Next slide. So first, let me share a little bit about who we are. The REL Northeast Islands is one of 10 regional educational laboratories, or RELs, across the country. We are joined by 2 other RELs today, REL Mid-Atlantic and REL Midwest, and we're all funded by the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. Our mission is to partner with educators and policymakers to conduct and use research that improves academic outcomes for students. We typically work with educational leaders at state departments of education, district leaders, and practitioners. Our work focuses on conducting rigorous research studies, disseminating findings to our audiences, and designing and delivering technical assistance to support the effective use of data in research and education. Next slide. The goals of today's webinar are to offer insights into data-driven methods for improving equity, drawing on learnings and tools from RELs Northeast Islands, Mid-Atlantic, and Midwest, as well as to provide evidence-based strategies to empower education leaders to promote equity in their schools and districts using data. By participating today, you'll learn about different tools and processes to promote equity through data and identify how you can replicate similar processes in your context. Okay, next slide. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. I'm Dr. Jessica Bailey, a Senior Research Scientist and Partnership Lead from REL Northeast Islands, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jennifer Starling, a statistician for REL Mid-Atlantic, and Dr. Liliana Carrera, a researcher with REL Midwest, and our colleague, Dr. Brian Gill, the director at REL Mid-Atlantic, was called away today, not able to present, but he's contributed to the presentations today. Okay, next slide. Great. So I'm going to start us off by presenting a 4-part data collection framework that can be used to inform the types of data collected at all levels of the education system. For example, at the state level or within a district or a school, including institutions of higher education. I'm going to focus on data related to students, but this could be applied to other groups as well. So next slide. Okay. So this framework brings together the framework includes 4 indicator types: systems, structures, and supports, access, participation, and performance. Collecting and examining the data within each indicator type can help ensure equity in educational programs and opportunities. I'll walk us through each one of these indicators in more detail. Next slide. So the first indicator refers to systems, structures, and supports. These can be resources, such as human capital or financial, or policies that support a program. For example, the total amount of funding available for a computer science CTE program is one relevant data point. In the case of funding availability, legislation may be needed to be passed to increase financial resources for a program. So it may be difficult for practitioners or administrators to move the needle on these indicators, such as enacting a new policy that provides program funding. However, these data points provide important pieces of contextual information when considering whether programs are equitably supported. Additionally, this indicator is essential to consider as it can impact the other three indicators in this framework. Okay. Next slide. So access is my favorite indicator and one that is often overlooked or confused with the next indicator, which is participation. Access indicators quantify whether students have access to an educational opportunity. For example, this could be the percentage of grade 9 students attending schools that offer a computer science CTE program. Or it could be the number of districts that offer a work-based learning opportunity, which could then be compared to the number that do not in the state. A student's access to an opportunity is a crucial factor in promoting educational equity, though it can be complicated to measure. Access can be measured in terms of students' access to high-quality opportunities. Thus, quality is another dimension in which to measure access. In REL-NE's work with state education agency partners on work-based learning, we found that some schools offered more intensive experiences, such as apprenticeships, than others, but they were not necessarily of a higher quality than short-duration opportunities offered in other schools. So gathering and examining these data is an important step in understanding if students face barriers to accessing educational opportunities, and if so, more information may be needed to understand how access can be increased for all students. Next slide. So participation indicators are commonly used in monitoring programs. They refer to data points about the students who actually participated in a program. Although seemingly straightforward, these data points can be complex and require thorough definition, such as determining who counts as participating in an early college program. Is it only those students who finished the program or those who completed at least one semester of the program? Having clearly defined quality participation data is a crucial step in understanding how programs can better serve all students. In another REL-NE project, we leveraged participation data available through state dashboards to engage practitioners in a root cause analysis to understand why participation in early college opportunities was lower for some student groups. Through this process, practitioners generated solutions to participation issues grounded in their own data and knowledge of their context. So again, it's an important indicator, one that's used very commonly. And we can go to the next slide. This is the last indicator type, and it's one that you're likely all very familiar with. Performance indicators refer to the performance level or successful attainment of an outcome. These can be academic, behavioral, or other types. They can be short-term or long-term. For example, the percentage of grade 9 students in a computer science CTE program who earned credit in an AP course is a short-term academic data point. These data play a key role in addressing equity by allowing data users to examine whether certain groups of students are achieving comparable rates of success compared to their counterparts. There are a few key considerations within this indicator, including a need to identify which outcomes are most important to measure and how they will be measured. Additionally, there needs to be consensus on how the outcome is defined, such as the performance level and what quote-unquote success entails. Okay, so on to the next slide. And for this last slide of mine, I want to share with you some more examples of how we've utilized this framework in one of our projects. And we actually have been utilizing this framework across many of our projects at REL-NE. In our partnership with the Vermont Agency of Education, we use the framework to create a data inventory of the state's work-based learning and CTE data, and that's career and technical education data. So for some context, Vermont enacted Act 77, Flexible Pathways to Secondary School Completion, back in 2013. Work-based learning is just one of the flexible pathways articulated in Act 77, and generally refers to experiences where students interact with and learn from industry professionals. Our team partnered with the state to create an inventory of their work-based learning and CTE data. Together, the team identified a few high-priority policy questions focused on the equity of their work-based learning and CTE programs. These high priority policy questions touched on each of the indicators of the data framework I just shared with you, with a particular emphasis on the access and participation indicators. As I shared earlier, support indicators are the resources, such as human capital or financial, or policies that support a program. As an example from Vermont, in this context, Vermont has a work-based learning coordinator endorsement, which ensures that educators have the knowledge to support high-quality work-based learning experiences. Vermont also has published statewide work-based learning guidance and standards. So those are examples of data points for this indicator. An example of an access indicator the team looked at with Vermont was the proportion of comprehensive high schools offering different types of work-based learning experiences. This illuminated whether students across the state had access to the full range of those experiences. One aspect of this data was whether schools offered on-campus and off-campus experiences. For example, on-campus experiences could look like career fairs or other career awareness opportunities, and off-campus experiences could be job shadowing or internships. The team also looked at available data on participation rates in different regions across the state for each of the different types of work-based learning experiences. Vermont was interested in knowing what participation looked like for Title I and non-Title I schools, and also by different student characteristics such as race and ethnicity. Lastly, the team inventoried whether schools and CTE centers collected data on a variety of outcomes. The most widely collected data element was course completion data. CTE centers are required to report on the number of industry-recognized credentials each of their students earned. However, the team found that this data was less widely collected across comprehensive high schools and was an opportunity for them to strengthen their data collection. So I hope that these examples have highlighted how this data collection framework can be applied. I'll be happy to answer more questions about the framework during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Additionally, we'll be sharing a handout of the framework with the recording of this webinar, and the handout will eventually be made available on our website. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Jennifer Starling at REL Mid-Atlantic.
Thanks, Jessica. So I'm a statistician at Mathematica, and my work for REL Mid-Atlantic and more broadly focuses on policy evaluation, subgroup analyses, and using Bayesian methods to support equity. And today I'll be presenting work that we've been doing in REL Mid-Atlantic around improving reliability in performance measures in education. Next slide, please. So our work is focused on the problem of unreliable school and subgroup performance measures in accountability systems. Next slide, please. So school performance measures are a useful tool in making sure that schools and groups of students get the support they need. Being able to identify groups of students who need extra support lets state education agencies direct resources to these students and tailor policies to make sure that these students have the support they need to be successful. And this requires understanding the performance of all groups of students, including groups that are traditionally disadvantaged. And it's key in doing this that we have good measures of subgroup performance, not just for accountability purposes, but also for state education agencies to use for diagnostics. And the trouble is, and the focus of our work, is that measuring performance accurately for small groups of students is tricky. Next slide, please. So the source of the difficulty is that education agencies need accurate information about groups of students to make decisions. And that includes accurate information about groups that can be quite small. Measurements based on small amounts of data are often unreliable, and this is because of measurement error. So this is a technical term that many of you are familiar with, but a lot of folks are not. And we frame this as the difference between the true performance and what is being measured. So measurement error is troublesome because it has a larger effect on small groups, and it can cause instability over time in the indicators that are used to measure performance. This can make it quite difficult to use those indicators to make decisions and be confident in those decisions. Next slide, please. So this measurement error means that small groups are more likely to show up in the extremes of these performance measure distributions due to randomness rather than true performance. And we can visualize this relationship between the subgroup size and measurement error. So on the left is an example where we can plot the group size on the x-axis or horizontal axis, and a measure such as proficiency rate in this example on the y or vertical axis. And what we often see is a funnel pattern where the small group sizes on the left are quite a lot more variable than the larger group sizes on the right. And there isn't any inherent reason that students in small groups would have more variable or more extreme performance. This funnel pattern we're seeing is indicative of the presence of measurement error. Next slide, please. So states often try to reduce measurement error by setting a minimum group size. But this requires a trade-off between accuracy and equity. And as you can see in the animation, setting a higher group size improves accuracy to some extent. But the trade-off is that small groups then become invisible. So students in these small groups aren't even considered for receiving additional support, even if they might need that support. And this also doesn't solve the measurement error problem because error affects all measurements. It just happens to be a bigger problem for these smaller subgroups. But on the flip side, including smaller groups means that everyone can be seen for getting support. But the trade-off is that results are often inaccurate. So either way, resources may not go to schools and students who need them most in this situation. Next slide, please. So we're proposing a new strategy to help mitigate measurement error, and this is a strategy that promotes accuracy and equity, and Bayesian stabilization is what we're doing here. So next slide, please. So Bayesian stabilization is a data-driven method to reduce error. And it works by stabilizing measures using models that learn from contextual information in the data. So in each subgroup, schools learn from other schools across the state and from their own past performance. And because this method is data-driven, the amount of stabilization each data point receives depends first on its sample size. So how many students are contributing to that measure? And how extreme is a measure or a data point compared to other values? And stabilization improves the reliability and precision of estimates, especially for these small subgroups. And this data-driven approach mirrors how we actually think about the world. Say if a large subgroup performed very close to the statewide average, we might not think twice about that. That might be quite expected. But if a small subgroup with just a few students contributing scores had a very extreme result, we might wonder if that particular score was a fluke. Next slide, please. So we conducted 2 case studies where we applied stabilization to performance indicators in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. And both state departments of ed shared real data so that we could explore how stabilization could support their accountability processes. Next, please. First, we did a pilot study in Pennsylvania to explore whether stabilization improved the reliability of academic proficiency rates for subgroups. And on the left, you see unstabilized proficiency rates, again with group size on the horizontal axis. And each point here is a school, and this is data for a single subgroup, just as an illustration, with some of the more extreme values highlighted in red. On the left, the unstabilized proficiency rates show the same kind of funnel pattern we saw earlier, where smaller groups are varying more widely than the larger groups on the right. And again, this pattern is flagging the presence of measurement error. On the right are the stabilized scores from Pennsylvania for this sample group. And we see that the smallest scores received the most stabilization. So they were pulled in closer to the overall mean, which is the solid line that you see. On the right, the scores also vary more uniformly over group size, and this indicates improved statistical reliability. And we did explore more formal measures of improvement in our analysis, but to keep it simple for today, this scatter plot is useful in visualizing that pattern and the kinds of improvements being made here. Next slide, please. In our second case study, we stabilized data for 5 measures for the New Jersey Department of Education. And we included ELA growth, proficiency, English learner progress, math growth, and math proficiency. So we expanded this analysis for New Jersey, and we assessed whether stabilization improved reliability for each of these indicators. And smaller groups have noisier scores, so without stabilization, they're more likely to appear in the extremes, just by chance. But without any measurement error, small groups shouldn't have more extreme scores, or shouldn't have extreme scores more often than medium or large groups. And for this analysis, we defined extremes as the top and bottom 5th percentile of each score distributions. And we looked at small groups of 10 to 19 students. And what we found was that stabilization mitigated the overrepresentation in the extremes of each indicator's distribution for these smaller groups of 10 to 19 students. Next slide, please. And you can go ahead one more. So we found in both of these pilot studies that stabilization improved reliability enough to include groups as small as 10 students in the measurement processes. And we also found that stabilization reduced overrepresentation of small groups in the extremes of each of the measure distributions that we considered. And stabilization can change which schools are flagged as low performing, as schools are able to include more students that were previously invisible to the process and may need support. So altogether, we found that stabilization can reduce measurement error to help states ensure that resources are going to students who need them the most, even students who were being previously overlooked by the accountability processes. Next, please. And these were exciting results, but in both of these pilot studies, we also heard the need to make stabilization easy and accessible. So we're excited to share that REL Mid-Atlantic is currently developing a free web-based tool that makes stabilization available for everyone. You will be able to apply these methods with no statistical coding expertise required. So users will be able to upload their de-identified group level data, follow a few easy steps through a user interface, and then download stabilized results that they can incorporate into their accountability processes. And this is coming in the spring of 2025. So we'll be sharing more information after the new year. And you can go ahead to the next slide. So thank you very much. And I'll now be turning it over to Liliana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Liliana Carrera. I am representing the REL Midwest. And today I am going to be talking to you about the Data-Informed Leadership for Equity, or DIAL approach. And I'm super excited to really share with you all how we are utilizing forecasting for equity. Next slide, please. So just wanted to introduce myself. I'm on this slide as a co-lead, but also some of my colleagues who aren't present today or are sitting and listening. Alicia Espinosa, who is a co-developer of this approach. Sanika Dilian, who is a co-developer and also a co-lead with me as we implement this in the REL Midwest. Next slide. So what is a DIAL partnership? We are partnering with local districts and schools currently in Iowa and Minnesota to support educators in making data-informed decisions focused on equity. And so we are utilizing an approach that hopefully reduces disparities between student groups, in particular in sense of belonging, disciplinary actions, and absenteeism. Next slide. So our approach is about three-prong here. First, we are utilizing data in a way that provides an adaptive data analysis tool called action-based monitoring. And this helps us report and facilitate our understanding of attendance discipline over time. And I will be talking about the forecasting that is embedded in this that really makes it proactive. The second approach is our taking action protocol. We actually provide our school leaders and staff with a protocol that really helps them consider and take initiative in utilizing the data and making sure that we are being equitable in our considerations. And finally, we provide school-wide training and coaching support throughout our implementation of the ABM tool and as well as our protocol. And really, this gives us an opportunity to have many touch points, many ways of support, so that we can make sure that actions that are taken when alerts from the action-based monitoring system are received are equitable. Next slide. So why sense of belonging? Why is this important? We are currently working with middle schools in Iowa and Minnesota. And one thing that middle schools really tend to see in the research is the lack or the difficulties of having a sense of belonging. It's a crucial age. And so what we know about sense of belonging is that when students feel accepted, respected, and included by others in their social school environment, they tend to do well, they tend to show up. However, this really varies across specific groups. And so when we take a look at diverse groups, we see different areas of downstream. However, what we have and do and provide in our trainings is a few culturally responsive practices that can really help support our teachers when they see data to make changes and hopefully improve attendance and decrease discipline, and of course, improve academic achievement, and really truly improve sense of belonging. Next slide. So as I mentioned, our three-prong approach here, we are proactive, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a few minutes here about why we are proactive. But we are proactive through our action-based monitoring system. We equip school leaders, and we really, this is my favorite part of the work that we do, is that we help them interpret the data in an equitable way. Because really, data is just data until someone starts to look at it and try to understand what it means. And so how are we making sure that everyone is looking at it from an asset-based lens, and that everyone is understanding how they can work with all students, diverse students that need our help? And obviously, our training and coaching support really focuses on culturally responsive practices, which we hope really make changes across all of the disproportional sense of belonging in the schools. Next slide. So what is action-based monitoring? Next slide here. As we all know, when you're about to go out, you're thinking, what should I take with me? Is it going to rain today? Is it going to be great? A forecast really helps you decide, well, it might rain later. I should take an umbrella. It helps you prepare. What we noticed is that middle schools were struggling in their attendance and sense of belonging. And we realized that even if they wanted to make actionable changes throughout the year, it's really hard to consider what changes to make. And typically you look at, attendance at the end of the year and you kind of evaluate, well, we didn't do so well here and here, but at that point, it's really too late. Our ABM system truly forecasts utilizing last year's data and kind of the data that's coming in throughout the year to help us understand where we are and where we might be at the end of the year. The goal for this is for us to support our schools in thinking, where should I focus my resources and time? Now being proactive, knowing what I think could happen, and hopefully stop that from happening, right? Stop disciplinary actions, improve attendance. Next slide. So our action-based monitoring measures attendance rates, rates of discipline, and then we also look at student sense of belonging. We also monitor, and this is where the equity piece comes in, by groups. So we monitor by grade level, and then we monitor by different groups such as race and ethnicity, economic disadvantage, for example, free or reduced price lunch students, and then students with disabilities or students who have IEPs. We have the ability to monitor other areas, just depends what data schools have available. Next slide. So I wanted to share with you all the ABM alert, kind of a visual, just so you all see what teachers are, in middle schools and educators and administrators are seeing that work with us. This is a fictitious school, of course. You would see the name at the top. We also showcase like where we are in the school year, kind of a progress report, right? Like this is the 18% going into the school year. But the great part here is this attendance forecast. Breaks down this subgroup, which in this case was English language learners, which again, as I mentioned, depending on the data that the school has, we are able to kind of look at specific groups of students who may need different actions to be taken place. And then we separate it by grade level. As you notice, you see some red and you see some white. Those in red are supposed to be alerts to let you know that according to the data from last year and utilizing the data we have currently from this year, it looks like you will not meet your end of the year goal, which is really just utilizing last year's end of the prior year baseline. And so what we do is basically forecast what could happen if things continue as they are for this subgroup of students. So this school may see sixth graders and seventh graders who are non-English language learners and may see the difficulty of them. And I would focus more on the seventh graders because as you can see all the way to the right, there's a 7% chance or 0% chance that they will meet their end of the year goal, meaning they are likely not doing so well in their attendance, and it's something that we should pay attention to. We then coach our teams to consider what action should we take to help these seventh graders. Next slide. Go ahead, next slide. We're now talking about training and coaching. And so as I mentioned, the action-based monitoring is just a part of the work that we do, because what we try to really do is make sure that they utilize the data and then interpret what does it mean and for, what are the needs of those students. And then our training really truly helps people understand the importance, our participants, and the importance of students' sense of belonging. We help them explore their cultural and implicit bias, and culturally responsive practices as well that they can utilize to take action when they notice that action is needed in these alerts. We also provide coaching, one-on-one support. And it's truly my favorite thing to really see school leaders and teachers and educators come together and look at the data and dig in and say, oh, this is where we need to focus our resources and time to really be equitable with our students and give them the support they need to improve their sense of belonging, and then, of course, improve attendance and lower discipline rates. Next slide. Wanted to share with you all just a few of our 5 culturally responsive practices that, after doing a review of all of the culturally responsive practices that are out there, there's so much, but these are 5 of really the ones that we really feel are useful, and we've seen being used in a really successful way in the districts and schools we have worked with. Truly maintaining and communicating high expectation for students, committing to building a caring classroom and school community, seeking and leveraging knowledge of student backgrounds. I mean, I could not tell you how much people have just changed their way of thinking of shifting the power dynamic in the classroom and how that really helps help a student just feel welcome. Cultivate cross-cultural communication, and then promote and develop student agency over their school experiences. These are just some practices that we have shared with our partners in Iowa and Minnesota, and we've just working so closely with them to really develop this approach and utilize this data tool in a way that creates equity and supports student sense of belonging. Next slide, please. If you have any questions outside of this webinar, feel free to contact myself or Sonica. Our emails are on the slide here. We are always looking to meet new possible partners and just connect with others who may be interested in what we're doing. Thank you. And I will transition over to Jessica. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liliana. That was a great presentation of you and of Jennifer. So we are going to move over to our panel discussion right now, and I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my colleague, Pratay Washington, who is going to moderate the panel today. Pratay supports the early childhood and out-of-school time fields at Education Development Center, or EDC, which administers the REL Northeast Islands. She provides technical assistance, fosters effective virtual and in-person learning experiences, and uses reflective practices and views systems through an equity lens. Prete holds a BA in Human Services from the National Louis University and a graduate certificate in Public Management from Indiana University Northwest. So thank you very much, Prete. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I think there should be some sort of certification for parent because I also have 2 teenage boys, and there needs to be some recognition for that. But anyway, thanks everybody for letting me be with you today. This was really fascinating discussion. I'm taking notes and also learning. So we have many questions, and I'm sure we could spend all of our time on any one of them, but we'll get started and see what we can get through. The first one is the models that have been shared speak to maybe some change in processes or how information is collected. And while we are all committed to best practice, sometimes people are resistant to change. And so I'm wondering if you all can speak to what strategies you've either used or could be used to help maybe change some of those mindsets for teachers and administrators that are resistant to change. And either Jennifer or Liliana can speak to that, or Jessica.
I can jump right in.
Sure.
You know, I do think, especially in the current landscape that we are, there might be some, you know, areas and states that we have had difficulty like trying to encourage individuals to consider even equity, right? And the need for it, unfortunately. But when we are working with educators and with administrators, and even when we have a little reluctancy in some of our conversations, what I have really seen work is truly having an open conversation about the needs of their community. I do think that, you know, sometimes people throw around the word equity a lot, and some people don't know what it really means. And truly, I think everyone can agree that all students deserve, you know, that their needs to be met so that they can learn. And I think we can all agree on that regardless of the verbiage being used and all of that. So I think I come to those types of conversations to really engage in open and honest conversations about what are the needs of students. And at the end of the day, I think for at least the most part that I have seen is that educators agree that, you know, we want to do our best to meet them. And so that's kind of my entry point into kind of developing, well, okay, here's why equity then matters. Yeah, that's kind of my way of looking at it and working with educators on it.
I love that, leaning into we all want the same thing, what's best for the students and their families. Thank you. Now, Jennifer, I know you, with the methods that you shared, you did some pilot in a couple of states. Did you have any resistance to the change, or how was it received?
Yeah, so how to get buy-in and how to communicate these methods has been something that we've thought a lot about. And one thing that has really been at the forefront is that in a lot of the accountability processes, there was already difficulty getting buy-in from educators because if you have noisy measurements, things can, you know, fluctuate quite a bit, especially when you're looking at these smaller subgroups from year to year. And so that makes it difficult to get buy-in when scores are sort of bouncing all over the place, and maybe you're, you know, identified for support one year, but you did a fantastic job in the previous year. So the thing that we've centered in using these methods is that we're improving accuracy and also making the experience really more aligned with what the educators might be seeing in the classroom, where, you know, they might have an erratic year due to measurement error, but that's not really reflecting what has been going on in the classroom.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. As you were talking about teachers, the experience of teachers of what's going on in the classroom, and Liliana, as you were talking about the different training and supports that you offer, I'm mindful of there's what's happening in the classroom, but there's also everything that's happening with children and families outside of the classroom in the school. And so for all of our panelists, I'm wondering about those environmental factors like changes in community, those things that happen. How does that factor into your methods and the work that you do? And I'll throw this out to any of the three of you in your work.
I can start with that one. And it's not specific to the data framework necessarily, but I think contextual information is really helpful for any kind of data and analysis work that we're doing. And because it does help to contextualize the results that we're seeing, especially trend data from publicly available sources, such as district demographic characteristics, if that's available, it should be utilized. And it's useful in the analysis phase of outcomes of interest because then you can disaggregate your outcomes by the characteristics and interpret them together to make better sense of it. As one example, REL Northeast Islands is doing a study in New York on early college in the state's early college programs. And we're using publicly available data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to understand why an early college program might not exist in a rural area of the state. So early college programs need an industry partner, and we've heard that in some areas there just aren't any viable industry partners. So we're using that contextual information. We're also using a mapping software to map that data together so that we can visually understand and interpret the information together. So I think that adds a really nice feature as well.
Thank you. Liliana or Jennifer, I didn't know if that that concept of those environmental factors, if that factored in at all with your work, if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, one thing I really appreciate about the dial approach is that we include coaching sessions throughout the year with our schools and districts. And so typically we see those kind of out of school things that happen in our community, and they get shared and those get implemented sometimes even to the actions that we take. And so I do feel like it's important to be continuously aware that each student has their own needs and concerns and issues even outside of school that sometimes does influence school, their school and themselves in school. And so it is kind of taken into account at that point as much as possible.
Thanks for that. So related to, we have talked about what's happening outside the school. I'm mindful of in the world of data collection, there's information sometimes that, you know, the numbers only tell part of the story. And so I think about the role of qualitative data. And I don't know if that's applied to the work that you do. I think about the models that you shared when we talk about like participation, learning about barriers to participating, or completing different programs, reasons for not being able to participate. And so I was wondering if the concept of qualitative data plays a part in your work. And again, I'll toss this out to anyone who'd like to start.
I can start. I do love the question, Prate, and I really appreciate it. And when I saw this question ahead of time, it really made me pause and reflect on the data collection framework because it is very quantitatively focused. However, I do think that qualitative data is relevant across all 4 indicator types. And as an easy example, actually in the first indicator, which is about the systems and structures and supports and collecting data about whether a policy exists or not, there's much more qualitative data that you can dig into about the policy. Does it exist? Well, what does it say? And getting some really rich information about that particular policy or funding for a program. And I think that is just one easy example. But I do think that for anyone that eventually uses this framework, I would encourage you all to use the framework with both qualitative and quantitative data points. And I mentioned earlier that we're applying this framework in a lot of different projects. And in the early college study that we're doing with New York that I just mentioned, we are using this framework in that study and ensuring that we are collecting data and analyzing data across these different indicator types. But in addition to that, we're also going to be assisting the state in undertaking a series of listening sessions to hear from those involved in early college programs to better understand the reasons why access may be limited in certain areas, right? Like maybe it is because there's no industries nearby, but we may not pick that up without some stakeholder feedback sessions. Or we'll hear about why implementation may be challenging, and maybe that's some contextual information that helps us better understand the outcomes that we're seeing. So for sure, qualitative data definitely plays a role in all of this and has a lot of benefits. So thank you for that and prompting me to think about it.
Mhm. Liliana, I'm visually, it's hard to see that. I'm looking at you, and I'm wondering if it how that might play a part of your work. I'm thinking about like the training that you do, and all of the supports around that. If there's a place for qualitative data and looking at that information in your work.
Yes, what, interestingly enough, I was actually we were talking about a team that we're coaching, and one of their action items was like, what if we did student focus groups to figure out why there is a lack of student sense of belonging? So I don't think that just because our approach doesn't specifically point out qualitative data, that it doesn't exist and it shouldn't be utilized. I just think that what we're trying to do, and to the point that someone might have posted, I think one of the questions was like, how do you work with schools or districts that don't have like the resources, is that, in particularly for Dial, what we are trying to utilize is be effective and helpful in the fact that our alerts you to where you should focus and utilize your time. And I think that is where we can kind of consider, well, what qualitative data are we missing? I like to work with our schools and even inform them, like, your connection to the student is qualitative data. Like that is data, that is information that you can utilize to make differences and changes in how you make students feel welcome and included, and how that could change their perspective to want to attend school and want to do better. And so I don't think that just because our approach is like only qualitative or quantitative focus, that qualitative doesn't have a space. I think that it definitely has a space and a need, especially when in an equity work.
Thank you for that. So I know that our conversation today is around using data to ensure equity. I'm thinking about the role of equity in the process. And so I think my next question for each of you would be, how do you ensure equity within your process, from the data collection through looking at the information that you receive to then go on and act on? How do you make sure that equity is a part of your process? Maybe we'll start with Ms. Jessica.
Yeah, that's great, because mine is about the data collection process, right? So the data framework for promoting equity is really a great strategy to ensure that equity is at the forefront of data collection efforts. It's really a precursor to the analysis stage, but it sets up analysts and data users to have a comprehensive set of data at their fingertips. So by having data across each of the 4 indicators, it allows us to first understand if there are gaps in data collection and inform where additional data may need to be collected so that we can address considerations of equity. And then second, when we have the data, it can inform whether programmatic or policy changes need to be made to better support equity and educational opportunities. So it's really ensuring that we have the data we need, or identifying those gaps, and then setting up the analysts and data users to then do their thing to look at what are the outcomes that we're seeing in terms of equity.
Thank you. Jennifer, you came off mute, you beat me to it.
Sure. Yeah, I think from the accuracy for everyone perspective, the big benefit to using the tool is really focusing on including these smaller groups of students that would previously be invisible. So I think one of the really big wins here is being able to explore including smaller groups that were previously invisible and really making sure that the data that are going into these processes to identify students for support are capturing everybody. So even though we're not, at the very beginning of the data collection phase, what would typically happen is all of the data would be collected, and then a state education agency might say, well, we're setting this minimum group size, so we're just dropping out these groups and they become invisible at that point. And that's really the point where with the tool, you could say, well, we're able to keep these groups now and use these stabilized versions of the measure to be able to make sure they're seen.
Liliana?
Yeah, Preeta, can you rephrase the question? I was listening to my colleagues and their wonderful explanations. I was like, wait, what do I say? How do I'm processing and
Yeah,
enjoying it too.
we were talking about how to make sure that we're infusing equity in the process, not just after we, we're looking at the data, but as you're collecting and analyzing it, how do you ensure equity?
Sure. It's so interesting. A colleague and I were recently coaching a group, and we had a moment where we were chatting about, being reflective of ourselves and our implementation role. And as facilitators and coaches, could we have done better? Where were our assumptions or biases in the work? And I think it's important to encourage reflection of everyone involved, especially in projects and approaches such as the ones that we're presenting, because equity is at the core of our work. And, it is a responsibility of everyone to really think through not only our students, but how and the approaches and the projects and the research, but ourselves as researchers and as really supporters of this work, to be reflective and see if even the way we are viewing the work can be hindering our students, right? And how that might downplay into them. And so it's super important to remain reflective even in the implementation and development process of these approaches and the collection of data as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It makes me think about in other spaces, we talk about how we bring our whole selves to our work, right? We have our lived experiences. We have like all those filters that we see the world through. And that doesn't stop when we sit down and we're Dr. Bailey or have any of our roles. And so I think that constant reflection is really, really important. And people being open to that, right? Even though we have so much experience and knowledge and expertise, still being open to looking at things in different ways. So thank you all very much. We still have a number of questions that we're going to get through, and some are more, we've talked more in general about the role of equity in the work, and there are some questions more specific around the models that you've shared. And so one is, and I apologize if I get the presenter wrong, so please let me know. No, Brute, that's not my model, that's the other person. But there's a question around, can you walk us through an example of how stabilization works? What is specifically done to stabilize? And I think this might be a question for Jennifer.
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So when we're stabilizing, we're taking the subgroup level data and we're fitting a Bayesian hierarchical model to that data, which you can think of like a fancy version of a regular regression model. And so these models are taking in the performance measures and then outputting fitted values or estimated values from the model. And these fitted values or estimates from each school are adjusted versions of the original performance measure values. And they're adjusted using the contextual information from other schools in that data set, as well as group size information. So how much do we trust that specific measure value? So we're fitting the models and then getting these estimated values. And the difference between the original and the stabilized is just this amount of adjustment. So without getting too much more technical, I hope that gives a medium high level idea, and certainly happy to provide more follow-up information for folks who want more specifics.
Thank you. That was, well, it was helpful for me. I hope it answered the question. If it did not, please use our question and answer to come back to us. Another question, and this may apply for each of you. How do you support the use of these tools and methods with schools and districts who don't have the staff with time or the data analysis skills or computer programs to engage?
I can start off answering that one. That is sort of exactly how the Accuracy for Everyone tool came to be, is that we worked on these pilot analyses and overwhelmingly got feedback that the methods were exciting and promising and just not accessible, expecting a state education agency to go in with statistical software expertise and fit these models and do all of this work was not realistic. They have a million other things to do, of course. And so the genesis of the tool was wanting to make these methods accessible for everybody.
Yeah, I'll just add as well that, and I think I alluded to this, is that, the goal of Dial is to really point to where we, when you have a lack of resources and time, to really showcase the data in a way that helps you be proactive and also quickly realize where you should focus your resources and time. I will say that, because we work with dashboards and data servers that are within the school, our ABM alert system is kind of outside of that, and so we work with each school to individualize how we can connect to get that data and utilize and develop the ABM tool for their school. And so I mean, just to kind of the point of the part of the question about how do we make sure that we work with schools that maybe might not have so much of maybe like an IT department or a developed, a data collection tool, is that we try to work with each individualized school and try to meet their needs where we can.
Thank you. So related to that, the question around resources, another question came in, and Jennifer, this one may be for you. Are the pilot districts that you've worked with around these tools, are the districts compensated for participation? And if so, where the funds, what were the funds to the district used for?
I don't believe we've been compensating them for participation. We're really grateful. They've helped, drive this work, and they've been very interested in helping move equity forward.
Thank you. Okay. There's another really good question around the security of data, especially as we're, collecting data and for equity. So I will read it. It's a bit long, so I'll read it, and then please feel free to respond. If individuals interested in using the A4E tool must upload their de-identified data for use of the tool, what data retention policies will be required? Will IES retain access to the data, or will the data be destroyed and used only for a singular session? These are equity concerns if A4E user gives their data for use.
Another great question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So each user creates an account, and when they upload their de-identified data, they set up individual stabilizations, and they would upload a data set for that stabilization. And the data that they upload is saved with that stabilization in case users want to edit or rerun it later on. But the user can also delete the stabilization and the associated data after they have downloaded the results. So the data is also private and saved only to that user's account for as long as that user wants. That data is never shared for any other uses within IES or in any other data frameworks.
Okay. Thanks. We had a follow-up question about stabilization that I will read. It says, thank you. I'm not sure how you would use information from other schools to help answer the estimate. Will the other schools selected be due to some similarity? So some schools that could be selected as the other schools to help with the estimate are excluded because they're not similar enough.
Yeah, so the way that it works is that the models really consider an individual school's estimate and then the overall average of estimates from all of the schools. So looking at that individual estimate and then the overall mean within that particular subgroup. And if you have a large number of students, and so you're very confident in that subgroup estimate, there would be less adjustment towards that overall mean or less stabilization. But if you had a very small group that had a more extreme score, then more stabilization would be applied to pull that score in a little bit towards the overall or the statewide average. So instead of thinking of it as comparing to different individual schools, you could think of it as all of the schools in the data set that you're uploading are contributing information for that subgroup. So we're looking at all of the other schools. And then if you upload time trajectories as well, we're also looking at past performance within that school. And happy to chat more if you'd like more detail on that as well.
Thank you. And this is a question for all of our panelists. Are you recommending the methods shared today for including smaller in size to states in their use of publicly available data? This could make students in rural communities visible in the equity discussion.
I'd say for the A4E tool, absolutely. The idea is that we want those students who are, say, rural or in other groups where they're currently invisible because the subgroups are just small. We want them to be seen and to get support if they need. So the methods are really designed with that goal in mind, yes.
Thank you.
I would say for DIAL, it's a little harder because what we are looking at is a little bit of a forecasting tool. So we're trying to look for a larger amount of numbers. And then so I don't know necessarily that I would say it wouldn't be helpful, because I think it would be helpful, but I don't know necessarily that I would go ahead and say this is a highly recommended tool for small n sizes, because what we're trying to do is look at a larger group of students and forecast that. And so might not be the best fit, but still could be utilized. I don't think it wouldn't fit perfectly. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Can you provide additional measures of opportunity to learn that can be disaggregated by underserved groups at the school level?
That's a question for me. And I'm trying to think about how to answer this question. It's a really good question. I think access is really the primary type of data that comes to mind when you think about opportunity to learn. Do the students actually have access to this opportunity? And I just back at the so I think in terms of some of the example data points that you can look at, and I'll take our New York study that we're doing, where we're actually looking at access as an example. We're looking to see whether districts have early college programs available. So a lot of these opportunity to learn data points are more about the context in which the student is in. It's not necessarily a student data point, but then you can disaggregate those data by different student groups, right? So we'll be comparing districts that have early college programs, the characteristics of those districts, to districts that don't have early college programs to see, for example, are they, a higher percentage of a particular race or ethnicity or are they geographically diverse in terms of where these programs are located, which we know will be a factor in New York. And so I think that, thinking about what are the opportunities, who has access to them, and then taking those data and disaggregating them by characteristics like student demographics or school district demographics is the way that I would approach that, and that's what we're doing in our New York study.
Thank you. We have one more question regarding the alerts sent via emails. What happens after your involvement ends in the school? Do you have a way to continue using a forecasting tool? Because it might rain later on.
Yep. We are looking into that. We do want to work towards ABM being structured and owned by the district that is utilizing it. So the goal would be for us to kind of hand off the baton and say, continue this. It's great. We are currently in that process of discovering that, because currently in all of our schools and districts, we are still present and actively supporting them in utilizing the ABM tool and kind of considering the data and what actions they take and supporting them in that. But the goal is for us to walk away and hopefully continue that. But we're looking into the specific options currently, actually.
Great. This has been a wonderful discussion. I don't know about the audience. I certainly have learned a lot. We haven't had any more questions come in, so I am going to turn things back to Jessica.
Thank you so much for today. This was a great discussion, and thanks everyone for your questions. In order to wrap up, we are going to share a survey. I believe the link is already in the chat, and we'd love your feedback on today's webinar so we can help improve future webinars. There's a link, so please do take it. The webinar, once it ends, the survey will also automatically launch for you, and it will just take a minute or two for you to fill it out. So thank you in advance. Next slide. If you'd like to contact any of today's presenters, their emails are listed here. You can reach out if you have additional questions from today. You can also visit the REL program website to learn more about our activities in the REL Northeast Islands region, as well as from all 10 RELs. Thanks again to all of our fantastic presenters today, and thank you all for joining. We really appreciate the time that you took. We hope that you learned something, and please do reach out. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.